Serious night owls of Reddit, what is the creepiest thing that happened to you when everyone else was sleeping? By Deleted.
Crixxa says, when I was about 12 to 13 I was laying in bed reading one night when I looked up and saw what looked like a man's head and neck lean into my room from near the ceiling on the outside wall. I say it looked like a man because it looked like really bad 90s CGI. The skin was smooth, plastic looking, and too orange. His eyes were hollow, making it look mask-like, but there was a deep red light that you could see through the eye holes. It very mechanically panned at a slow even rate from left to right and then back to center before leaning back out through the wall. Needless to say, I had a really hard time getting to sleep that night. I probably only slept for a couple hours before I heard my parents stirring around in the kitchen. The phone was also ringing way too much for how early in the morning it was, so I left my room and asked what was going on. Apparently, my uncle had gone missing the previous night after coming out to hunt on our land. His body was found hanging over a barbed wire fence at the back of our property later that morning. In retrospect, the weird face did eerily resemble his. I've never spoken to my family about it.
FondleMyPancakes says, hearing people say my name. Or one time when my brother lived with us and we shared a room, both sleeping on mattresses on the floor, I had dressers down the middle of the room to separate my side from his. Something dragging its long dark hair across the floor and its head slumped down crawled towards me. It was my brother, he was sleep crawling.
Ellifina says, a few years ago I was on a camping trip with some friends. It was my first time camping in an RV. I have to say, it doesn't really feel like camping, more like a really comfy extended road trip, but I was glad we had the road that night. I was up late browsing through Reddit as you do when through my open window I heard someone open one of the compartments on the outside of the RV. Thinking it was my friend Josh who was bunked over by the outside door, I whispered asking if he wanted to have a beer and go down to the creek. Instead of responding, I heard the gravel crunch as he walked around and jiggled the door handle. Thinking he locked himself out, I crawled down from my bunk and put my foot down right into Josh's stomach. He was pissed, yelling at me for not watching where I was going and upset that he was woken up like that. Plus, I kinda think I was dangerously close to stepping on his balls, but neither of us felt the need to broach that subject. I asked him who went outside and he angrily told me to go back to bed, that nobody was outside. So I did, not wanting to continue that unpleasant conversation. Early the next morning as the sun was barely peaking, there was a loud series of knocks on the door. It was a cop asking if we had seen anyone suspicious the previous night. Apparently some campers near us had been assaulted by some crazy guy who fled into the night. Using the timestamps from my Reddit posts, I was able to give him a reasonably close approximation of the time it had been when I heard the noises out the window. He told us that the campgrounds would be closed the rest of the day and we had to relocate. On our way out, we had to drive past where the crime scene must have been and it was eerie thinking how easily that might have been us.
TheRealEichenballer says, I was in a call with my girlfriend one night a month or so ago and had fallen asleep. The next morning she tells me she heard someone walking around on my side of the call, a door closing, and someone talking to me. Apparently she tried waking me up, even yelling for me to try to get me up, but I was fast asleep. I asked my family the next morning and none of them were awake or in my room at any point that night, so I'm still not sure what she heard.
Lilyflower716 says, when I went to visit my boyfriend at the time in Long Island, New York for the first time I stayed at his house. Because his parents were old school they didn't let us sleep in the same bedroom, so they accommodated me in the den. Mind you, the den is below the house and is just a few steps above the basement. I woke up facing the wall and felt the other side of the bed sink as if someone had sat down on the bed and the room was suddenly really cold. I got the hell out of there and made him switch me rooms. Something was off. Found out later his grandma had died a few months prior. She lived, slept and died in that same den.
Ren_Crow says, a couple years back, I was staying at my grandparents' house for some reasons. They live in the middle of nowhere, Australia. I was almost asleep when I hear this screeching noise from outside. It sounded far away and way too mechanical to be an animal. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, when I start seeing these flickering purple and red lights out the window in the corner of my eye. Whenever I properly looked, I didn't see the light, but when I looked away, it was there. I thought that it was lighting, or something, but was rather spooked at this point, so I Googled everything. I eventually get out of bed to investigate, and go into the kitchen where I would be able to see outside better. I sat in the kitchen from probably 20 minutes not seeing anything. I went back to bed and tried to ignore it. In the morning I found out what had happened. In the area it's not uncommon for people to steal cars, go for a joyride and then crash it in an abandoned cane field, and set it on fire. The purple lights were the headlights and the red was the fire.
JustThereforthelul says, I was pulling an all-nighter when I was in high school because I had an essay that I didn't start until the last minute. I was home alone that week because everyone was out of town. I was in my room typing on my computer and listening to music at full blast when out of nowhere I heard my name coming from the kitchen. Now, my room was next to the kitchen, so I definitely knew it came from there. It was also loud enough to be able to hear it over the speakers. So I walked to the kitchen, and as soon as I do this, a cooking pan falls off the kitchen sink. NGL, it made jump and I immediately turned on the lights. Obviously there was no one there, and it could have been my imagination and a coincidence that the pan fell. But I turned on all the lights in the house just in case.
Valentine's 450140 says, girl knocked on our door at like 2 a.m. She wasn't wearing pants or panties. Was on meth. Could not put her elbow below her ear. Was on her period. She escaped a house where she was trading sex for meth/a place to stay. We got her help, but holy shit, was that a change of tone for the night. Oh.
Pearcake42 says, my room used to be the basement. I lived in a too small house with my separated parents, brother, aunt, uncle, grandma, and cousin. The basement had concrete walls and one high off-ground small window, so I put my bed as close to the stairs as possible and bought a space heater. But anyways, I still had trouble sleeping there, so I'd lay awake at night. One night I heard a weird sound. I heard a sort of squish noise and a deep groan, down in the basement with me, so I turned on my lamp that didn't quite light the entire room. I got up and was shaking with fear and was like, hello? No response, but no way was I gonna sleep down there, so I grabbed my pillow and booked it out of there. But as I was going up the stairs, the sound came again, but extremely loud. It woke my brother in the living room. I've never felt more fear than I did right then. It's hard to describe the sounds. It was like a deep yell/groan.
Thick637 says, on multiple occasions I swear something has tapped on my window. I'm on the second story. I've also had a few very vivid hallucinations about shadowy men standing at my door just staring at me. Not too long ago, my PC and my PS4 turned on at exactly the same time, and there was no one but me in the room, so I just unplugged them both and went on Reddit for an hour.
Pumpkineater_69 says, when I was younger, I shared a bedroom with my older brother. I was in second grade, so I usually kept the door open to get light in because I was scared of the dark. My brother would always close the door and refuse to open it because he was bigger and older. I couldn't do anything about it. Well, one night I woke up to a pitch-black bedroom. As my eyes started to adjust, I glanced over to my brother's bed across the room and noticed that he wasn't in it. As I looked across the room, there he was. He was standing right in front of the closed door, just standing still. Since it was really dark, all I could see was his black figure, a silhouette of a little boy. I didn't move a muscle. My brother stood in his position motionless for 10 minutes until I dozed off into sleep. To this day, the thought of what he was doing and the look of his motionless dark figure still keeps me up at night.
Silhouette_6 says, the light bulb from my lamp exploded, literally shattered, and for a few seconds I was in complete darkness waiting for the demon that did that to kill me or something. Then I used my phone as a flashlight and replaced the bulb.
_Willowthbelow_ says, went downstairs for whatever reason. There is two thin windows at the side of the front door letting in a little light from street lamps. I see a humanoid shadow against the light and freeze. I have minor hallucinations, but I've never had a humanoid one. I didn't see anyone after that and nothing was stolen. However, the garage door was open.
Theaterfangirl says, I heard the computer keyboard making typing sounds. Opened my eyes and saw the computer was turned off and everyone was asleep. I got scared and closed my eyes again, but then I heard the guitar beside me strum once. Covered myself with my blanket and just forced myself to go to sleep.
ByroniustheGreat says, it's 2 a.m., I need to leave this thread so that I can sleep tonight. Proceeds to stay in the thread.
Blue296101 says, I was walking down my hallway into my kitchen to get a snack. We were moving at the time, so there were a lot of boxes everywhere. There was one pile so high it almost reached the ceiling. I looked at the pile and saw two glowing guys. I thought the box was a very tall human. Turns out my cat jumped up there and was just staring at me. Not much, but I thought it was scary at the time.
Deleted says, felt like there was a spider in my bed. I threw off my covers and never found it.
Jules Loves You 1993 says, used to live with my ex in a house where something did not like me. It got to the point where every single time I fell asleep downstairs, where his room was, I had sleep paralysis. One time we were cuddling and he fell asleep before I did and I started hearing growls and stuff. At this point this was fairly commonplace, so I tried to just ignore it and fall asleep. When I finally did, I had a horrible nightmare that something was pulling me into the closet and beating me. I woke up to sleep paralysis and heard a deep gravelly voice say, "Come here, sweetheart," from the closet. I stopped sleeping down there after several experiences of seeing things down there while I was sure I was awake too, but that was fucking terrifying because I felt so helpless. Another time more recently, I was in Texas visiting my grandma and everyone was asleep. It was very early in the morning, like 4 a.m., before I finally asleep. After seemingly just a few minutes I woke up to my toddler son saying, "No," really loudly and forcefully. Look over and he's still asleep, look back to my right and there is the shadow of a man standing a few feet away from me. I couldn't see well because it was dark, but there was clearly someone in the room. I got confused for a minute and said, "Dad," thinking maybe he came in for some reason, but then the figure didn't move or say anything and I realized it wasn't him. I freaked out and reached to turn on the extremely bright night light and when I turned back it was gone. I fucking hated sleeping there the rest of the time. To make it even worse, I was telling my sister about it and she was like, "Oh yeah, I saw him the first night we were here." Apparently she was reading in bed and turned over and he was standing over her bed. My family has always been sensitive to this stuff, and my sister most of all, so she didn't mention it until I told her about what I saw. I've been kind of on the fence for most of my life about these experiences, but that put a bullet through the head of me not believing in the supernatural anymore.
Chartwellandgodspeed says, almost killed myself trying astral projection at night once. Told this story on another thread but it was buried. When I was in high school I found a book from the 70s on astral projection/lucid dreaming my mom had from her hippie days. Spent a couple nights reading it and was all excited to try it. The next night I go to sleep and I did it. I'm in a dream, and I'm standing on my bedroom floor next to my bed, and I'm totally aware it's a dream. I'm kinda just standing there in my room looking at my bookshelf trying to decide where to go and was pretty set on Ireland. When everything goes dark, all I feel is my head rocking back. Pressure on my eye. Then it happens again. And again and again and again. When I open my eyes I'm back in bed and gasping for breath. I was lightheaded. And then I have to reach up and grab Abby, our rescued declawed cat, because she's on my chest with her poor mutilated paws pressed together and she's diving at my eye. That cat put her paws together and was jabbing me in the eye to wake me up, using all her tiny cat force to do it over and over again. I never tried it again after that because I think too much of me left my body, and it was just dying while I was sticking around with my soul out of my body. That little cat saved my life, I think. Also, she was this tiny black cat. If she weighed 5 pounds I'd be surprised, so I wasn't out of breath because she was on my chest.
Archayvic says, "Alright, I have a bunch of thing for this, so I'll write out a few stories. I'll sprinkle in some TLDRs. This one inst really at super late night, but I was at a friend's house for a birthday party and we watched exciting videos, the North American stalker creature, until / 10 p.m. when we had to go home. After a long day terrifying each other, we were getting to my neighborhood when my friend points at a house and says, 'I bet the rake lives in there,' and as he points, the lights came on. As a bunch of 12-year-olds at the time, we freaked so hard. TL, Dr. Lucky coincidence. The next few are more paranormal in nature, the last will not be. Another sleepover this time. The time is about 11 p.m. and my group of 6-ish guys were at one of our houses. This was yet another birthday. His house has a walkout basement that had windows facing a quiet road into the neighborhood. Suddenly, car lights appeared facing the window, and by lights, I mean brights, and the car never moved, never started, and we never heard it drive into place. We did have the window open and haven't seen the car until the lights appeared. The car was a simple red sedan. Car shined its brights into the window until almost 1 a.m. in the morning, when without warning they shut off. After all our conspiracies about the car, we went to see where it was now. The car had vanished with its light, the same way it appeared. No noise, no movement, not even headlights down the road it would have went to avoid detection from the window, and we could see a long way down that road as it was out of the trees and flat. TL, Dr. Random car appears on road, shines brights into window for hours, then disappears. This is a collection of stuff. If you believe in paranormal things, then you may have heard of a rainbow vortex. It's a place where spirits gather to move on essentially. My house is located right at the edge of one of these. There's almost always something between the times of 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., it's 2:40 a.m. RN. Usually small things like objects rattling or sliding or footsteps, etc. I've gotten used to these by now. The weird things are sometimes the hallway will just flash bright light for no reason, think silent lightning, and no apparent source. I've only seen that twice. My desk now faces away from the door. The other creepiest thing is that my old laptop, which was 8 years old, had a battery life of about 5 minutes idle. Remember this? I had recently done a factory reset on it so we could recycle it later. It had been sitting on the kitchen table for about a week and I had set it to mute and left it there to die. One day, at 2-ish am, the computer starts the setup sequence for Windows on full volume. I go out there to see what's going on and actually got the audio on a video. I opened the case and it shut off immediately. I tried to power it on and I couldn't, as it had ran out of battery almost 6 days ago. TL, Dr. Random paranormal things and a dead laptop speaking to me. Phew. More random paranormal things here. Not super late either. One time I was trying to sleep when I heard footsteps in my room. I figured it was my cat, even though they sounded weird, so I called her name. She would then usually meow back the jump on my bed and commence suffocating me by laying across my face. But instead, the steps back out of my room and I hear a solid on the wood floor and no more. Another time, I was out trying to find our outdoor cat who had gotten lost in the night so I could lock him in the barn at night. I figured he got locked in the garage. So I went in to find him. He wasn't in there. When I was searching, I happened in front of the gym door at the back of the garage. While there I stepped on a moth and hit my foot on the door. After just having watched a horror movie, the first thought in my head was, wouldn't it be funny if something knocked back? And I my dismay, something knocked back from the back left corner of the gym, where a few days before my mom said stuff had been falling off the walls that hadn't been touched in months. It was just 3 short knocks, but I got out of there fast. And it didn't help that I heard them again on the wall outside. And it doesn't help that a few weeks before my mom and sister were scared back inside when they heard a solid knock on the garage door when they were walking past it, so I had to go out and do what they wanted, and I heard it too. For those of you wondering, the cat was already in the barn. TL, Dr. Footsteps in my room, knocking in garage. Last one, I swear. I was out walking around a park at 11:30 p.m.ish with a friend, 'cause that's what we do, and when we got to the end of our walk we were just sitting there, 'cause why not? When a white car drives by and screeches to a halt. The driver rolls down his window and yells, "Hey kids! Want some green chili?" We say no, it's good chili. It's only $5. No thank you. Then the back window rolls down and another guy leans out. "You sure you don't want the chili?" "No." And lo and behold, the driver actually grabs a styrofoam cup full of green chili and tries to sell it on us. After a few more minutes or not buying chili, they drove off saying your loss. TL, Dr. Guys try to sell me $5 green chili at 11:30 p.m. in a park. This may be the longest response on this thread. If you read this whole thing, I applaud you for persistence and you get a cookie.
Sojo142 says, I was up late or early, I guess, a few nights ago and had my back slider open. My room has a slider entering the backyard, and the back porch light on. Some fucking random ass dude pokes his head through my curtain, freaks me right the fuck out. Turns out he's my neighbor. My little brother had left the back gate open, and he was asking to pick up his kid's ball before said kid woke up. It wasn't really nuts, but like, why are you fucking poking your head into my bedroom?
AnarchyAnalBeads says, this probably doesn't fit the description of creepy. I don't know. Prefacing this, I am a chronic insomniac prone to bouts of extreme late night walks. I live in the suburbs of Tokyo. Anyway, I'm off on my rounds, maybe it's about 2 a.m. I heard cats screaming, absolutely in terror. I still can't get over the racket they were making. I searched high and low and couldn't find the source of the noise. Eventually, buried under some thickets on a piece of scrubland, I found a cardboard box, taped up with no air holes or vents. It seemed very deliberately done, callous. I scraped off the tape to find 2 very small kittens inside. Well, don't worry, I told them. I'll take you home with me. Texted my very sleepy wife and explained what happened. She got a spot prepared for them. Food, water, etc. I took them to the vet the next day and he gave them the once-over, gave them the shots, etc. I asked him if I could put an ad in his window hoping someone would adopt them. Luckily someone did.
Livigo6_ says, I always have my window open at night because of California heat, and one night at around 2 a.m. a sketchy white car parked in front of my house. No one got out, no one got in, and it left about an hour later. Nothing really happened, but the fact that I've seen it around the neighborhood multiple times, and I know they don't live here or anything because my town/neighborhood is very small, freaks me out a lot. The windows are tinted very darkly, and I know it is the same car because of the license plate, so I never really could see who was inside. Still freaks me out a bit when I see it around.
BenedictLowerDict says, I was listening to a creepy Russian song, and thought I heard a knock at my door. Turns out, Terry's a subtle knock sound in the song.
Wellwhatevernever says, someone knocked on my window at 2 a.m. when I was 13 and home alone. There were 3 knocks coming from my balcony window. It's pretty strong because it was raining like hell. My room is on the 3rd floor and I don't even have neighbors because I live in a rural area. I can't explain it, but I spend the night being terrified to walk by the window.
Hexariel says, mouse fall from wall to my hands when I was sitting in bed at 3 a.m. with my smartphone and all the house was sleeping. I had pet white mice before, a cat who rolled over cage with them once and they escaped. But that was gray mouse.
Idontrememberasking says, my husband volunteers for the RFS, Rural Fire Service, volunteer firefighter in Australia, and one afternoon I had washed all his gear and hung it out on the clothesline. Went to let the dogs out for a wee about 1 a.m. and the dogs started barking really aggressively at something in the backyard. I turned the backlight on to see what looked like an 8-foot man standing dead still staring at me in the backyard. Turned out the backlight caught the reflective parts on his uniform that lit them up to expose what looked like a giant man. I was home alone with the kids at the time and was so terrified, even after I realized, and hardly slept a wink.
CircusMasterKlaus says, when my son was a newborn, my husband worked late shifts which left me home alone. I didn't like to stay on my own at night, so I tended to stay up late in the living room watching TV until he came home after midnight. We lived in a quiet community and were the youngest residents by about 40 years. One night around 9, someone starts feverishly pounding on my back windows. They were hitting them so hard that my walls were shaking. I jumped up, and it quit. I had no idea how to explain it. My husband came home and I had him check the back of the house, but there was nothing there. Oddly enough, my son slept through all of this. A few nights later it happened again. Only this time, it didn't stop when I stood up. It kept going, harder and louder, for nearly 30 seconds. I started yelling, thinking someone was messing with me, and it quit. I called my father-in-law who lived close by, and asked if he was trying to scare me. He's known as a prankster, and he told me he'd never do something that scary, or do anything to wake up my son that late at night. He asked if he needed to come down, but I didn't want him to think I was some scared city girl afraid to be on her own, so I said no. My own dad came by the next day and set up a punji stick trap in the backyard, underneath the windows. My husband sat the shotgun out for me. The next time it happened was the worst. It was around 10 p.m. when the banging began, and I'd had enough. I faced the windows and screamed, "I have a gun." There was a short pause. Then the banging began with an intensity it had never had before. It was like someone was trying to knock down the wall. I grabbed the gun and slung open the door, not a great idea in hindsight, and shouted, "Fucking try me." The banging stopped. It never happened again. My husband and I checked the area under the windows out back. None of the traps had been activated. We had several other odd happenings at that house, but nothing ever scared me as badly as that.
weedbetterknot says, the feeling of someone standing behind me. I can't always wear headphones because I feel something and I'm worried I won't hear it. In my bathroom I thought a cat had brushed against my leg when I was alone. I even saw something dark low to the ground. I spun around and turned on the light, no cat. I'm always alone, it's always at night, a dark figure. My dad is dead and my hand was on his chest when he died. He was a real asshole about pranks in life, so I try to reassure myself it's him.
throwawaysccount-thr says, English is not my main language. I will try my best to translate. I was in the basement playing games and it was a bit dark. Anyways, I feel like there was someone behind me, so I turned back and I just looked at the floor and I saw a feet. It was female feet and I thought it was my sister. I keep on playing because I thought my sister went to the dryer to take out the clothes she forgot overnight. 5 minutes later it was very silent, like no one in the basement except me. I called her name but no one answered, so I went to the washing machine/dryer and no one was there. I was scared that I went running upstairs. There is no way it was my imagination. I told the story to my siblings and they told me their experiences too.
Wolfie Productions 98 says, about a month or two ago at like 2 in the morning I got up to get a glass of water when I saw some guy in a black hoodie with something sticking out of his pocket standing in front of my door. I was terrified, so I went and grabbed a knife to defend myself with and locked myself and cats in my room until morning. When I went out into my living room I saw nothing and I remembered we had a security camera that showed our front porch, so I showed my roommate and turned it into the police, but they couldn't see his face so they couldn't do much. Still gives me chills thinking about it. TL Doctor, some guy is outside at 2 a.m. with what I think is a knife. I huddle with my cats until morning. Turn video surveillance to police.
GamersStrike says, hearing my guard German Shepherd barking like crazy. He only does that when someone is trespassing. I go out and look through the garden, the place is empty. I go back and am gaming and I hear thump thump. I jump out of the couch and I look outside once more. Later that night at around 3:19 I see this shadow in my bedroom. I go in and I find my lamp on with no one inside. I keep hearing or seeing weird crap. I might move to the city since I cannot handle the countryside life.
The raccoon says, had an owl come up to my window and stretch out its arms and it screech at me, scared the fuck out of me because I don't notice and I legit think I had a mini heart attack.
darealcs says, 3 a.m. I wake up because I'm clear as day hearing someone whispering in my room. Was frozen with fear, seconds away from calling out to a family member for help when I realized I'd fallen asleep to a bit of ASMR on autoplay.
TheMortyLord says, a random emergency alert went off on the TV. I saw my school name without my glasses on before it turned off. I searched the web for anything that it was about but couldn't find anything. I turned over to my dad sleeping on the other side of the couch, looked back down at my phone and then clocked out for the night. I can barely remember anything else happening that day except for that.
Cappilla says, I was laying in my bed reading like I am now and out of nowhere I hear a woman start screaming and wailing/sobbing. It turns out it was my neighbor's, now ex-wife. They had a habit of getting drunk and then getting into really big fights. We already knew that they'd fight a lot, but that was the first time I ever heard her like that. She must have been sitting outside because it sounded like it was right outside of my window. That was definitely creepy.
Deleted says, once when I was about 13-14 I was spending the night at one of my friend's house. He and I were up all night playing WoW and we would switch off to get so rest time. One time while I was playing around 4 a.m., I looked over and he was asleep. I just decided to keep playing. I remember looking down their hallway and I remember seeing a kid that we both knew walk across the hall several times. This area was known to be formed on a gravesite. I tried to tell my friend that I saw the kid we knew but it was really hard to believe.
No_11236 says, when I was 10 to 12 years old, I was sitting in my bedroom at, like, 3 a.m. No one was awake, I didn't have school the next day, and there wasn't any traffic. I hear a knocking sound from my window, so, I look at my window. There wasn't anyone there, so I went back to playing my video games. I'd say about 30 minutes later, I heard the knocking again. I look at my window, again, and guess what? No one was there. I ignore it again, and go back to playing video games. About an hour or so later, I get up to take a piss. A little context for the next part. My bathroom is a little weird. There's a window right above the toilet with no curtains or blinds. I hear my dogs barking, all 3 of them, and I look out the window into the backyard to see a man, dressed in a hoodie and jeans, walking up to my bedroom window. He looks up into the window, I guess seeing the bathroom light on, sees me and sprints off into the woods. This isn't actually the creepiest thing I've had happen to me. I'm very prone to having paranormal/weird stuff happen to me for some reason. But, this story was what popped into my head. TL, doctor was up at around 3 a.m., weird dude was knocking on my window.
phmsanctified says, when I was about 18 I was sitting on my parents' back porch with my buddies smoking weed after everyone was asleep, and all of a sudden I heard this sound that sounded like a gun clicking because there were no bullets in the chamber. I turned to my friend who was white as a ghost and said, "Did you hear that?" He nodded his head and said sounded like a unloaded gun clicking. We just both stood up and went back inside.
dylanboora says, so I once stayed up late and I heard what sounded like a dog barking whilst being strangled. It kept getting louder and closer until it became quiet, and this is where it was in front of my house. I looked at the CCTV and I saw this very thin, silver figure running around the drive. The motion sensor light never came on. This thing had no arms or head, just had a thin body and thin legs. I turned my phone off. 5 minutes later the barking started again as the thing moved further away.
Dermadeo01 says, after my 8th grade graduation I half fell asleep at 1ish. I then was paralyzed with fear when, out of the corner of my eyes, I thought I saw a curled up person with glowing yellow eyes sitting on one of my shelves. After waking up the next morning, I realized it was one of those metallic balloons that said congratulations, in yellow text.
MGBSN51313 says, kind of a funny one but freaked me out when it happened. Was up playing Sly 3 one night at my parents' house. This was on the second floor in a room that connects to the upper deck. My parents have cameras and lights that go off when something was moving in the backyard to give you an idea. So anyway, I'm playing the game when I hear heavy steps in the deck, some of which sounded like it had claws. I noticed that the lights hadn't been triggered, so my first thought was, what the hell is that and how did it get up here without triggering the lights? So being the brave person I am, I turned on the lights of the room I was in and opened the curtains to the door that leads to the deck. Lo and behold, my sister's dog is there staring at me through the glass doors. Apparently my parents let the dog out earlier that evening and didn't bother to tell anyone. The dog had just gotten uncomfortable and was pacing the deck wanting to come back in. Let her in the house and it never happened again.
A versatile potato says, something skinned to a camera flash outside my window through a crack uncovered by the curtain. I live on the 10th floor. It happened over the course of a few days several times. Yeah, my curtains are always shut. I don't like them open anymore.
Stupid_boy08 says, I used to get kicked in the face by nothing and people would call my name. Like at 3 in the morning I was laying down and I felt like someone kicked me but nothing was there. And I'd hear people call my name when they weren't. For example, I've heard my grandpa call my name multiple times but he lives 1,100 miles away from me.
NartLily2904 says, it was about 11 p.m., and my friends wanted to FaceTime since I hadn't been in school for a few days. Since I share a room with my sister and she was asleep, I decided to go downstairs as to not wake her. I was in our living room, and had probably been down there for about 30 minutes when I started to hear scratching from the front door and my Alexa started responding to random things that I wasn't even saying, setting alarms when I hadn't mentioned times or anything, Googling things that I hadn't mentioned. I turned off the Alexa and checked the front door was locked. I stayed on the call with my friends until about 12:30 a.m. and then went back upstairs. To get back upstairs I had to walk past the kitchen, which always gives me the creeps, and I glanced in and swear I could have seen a black figure standing by the shelves in the corner. I thought maybe it was nothing and I was just seeing things because I was tired and paranoid from earlier, but still heard upstairs anyway. I got back upstairs and was surprised to see, what I assumed was, my sister sitting up in her bed in the dark. I kept the light off as I presumed my sister was still half asleep and it wouldn't be fair to wake her up completely. I talked to her and was confused that she just sat there, unresponsive, but reasoned she may have earplugs in. The whole time I was changing into pajamas she sat, a dark figure on her bed. I climbed into my bed and as I did so, my sister walked through our bedroom door. I freaked out completely. For the past 10 to 15 minutes something had been on her bed, a dark sort of figure/mass had just sat there whilst I got changed and got ready for bed. My sister called me delusional and said I was imagining things due to drowsiness, but I know that wasn't the case. I still freak out when I see shadows on her side of the room when she's not there, and I can't help but think maybe the scratching and the Alexa and the shadow downstairs are all sort of connected. Hasn't happened since though, so I really don't know what to think.
Doublepulse says, I've had many years of third shift jobs, which I always wind up in out of desperation then remember why. I had a guy in a Dodge Charger follow me from the west side of Indy to the area I lived in on the south side. There was about 10 minutes I thought it was a car pacing me to pull me over for speeding, fair enough, it was an empty interstate at 5 a.m, I was going a bit fast, but it lasted to my exit. Then almost to my neighborhood. I ended up taking multiple turns and did not go home. The cops that normal hung out at the DD connected to a nearby gas station weren't there that day. Why, I don't know. Eventually he sped off. I work third shift grocery and retail currently. We aren't allowing shoppers overnights currently, but before the pandemic we'd routinely have shoplifters and people whacked out on drugs, alcohol or fucked up because they were off their meds come in. We usually call the cops once or twice per Friday or Saturday night. This ranges from angry yelling, destruction, threats, and people sticking items in their snatchers. It has happened twice. At one point in time I also did a newspaper ad stuffing side gig. I'd get out at the same time as the bars. If I stopped to grab something from the gas station on the way home, there would always be some drunk dude in a parking lot yelling insults at another drunk. Another point I watched a car bust a man pissing behind a building. 2 women in a hair-pulling fight. An old man getting angry about the lack of hot dogs. Weirdness.
Captain_Florida says. Was camping at a quarry in Idaho on an off day on tour in 2012. I saw a UFO.
The Mysterious Man 1 says. I once was awake at 4 a.m. playing games with my friends. Then I heard a tap at my window. My bedroom is upstairs, so I was freaked out to look, but I did anyway. Saw literally nobody at my window, so I opened it to get a better view. I still couldn't see anyone. Went back to my game when something landed on my bed next to me. It was a rock. I looked and realized I forgot to close my window. I jumped up and shut it before looking out for whoever it was. I saw someone bolt. I assume he was trying to break in and was checking if people were awake in the house.
DontayeCole says. The night before I moved, back in the beginnings of 2018, I slept in my room one last time. It was only me, as me and my sister shared rooms, but she was at the other house with my grandma as she was preparing the house. I fell asleep at around 10 to 11 p.m. I wake up at around 3 a.m. to witness a shadow walking away from the room and into the hallway. As I begin to regain my conscience, I jumped out of my bed and saw nobody. This was definitely one of the creepiest moments in my life. Edit: I forgot to mention that I sometimes have nightmares or unpleasant dreams of my old house from time to time.
More_Mortem says. A couple of years ago I lived in another town. We had a German Shepherd dog called Smiley. He was a big, relatively scary dog. He was laying outside on our porch. I was laying on the couch watching TV. This happened around 1 or 2 a.m., but it's really quit with the exception of the TV when all of a sudden I hear Smiley start barking. I just thought it was a cat or something. Well, he stopped barking when I heard something climb onto the porch. It hissed, and swear to God our scary tough German Shepherd starts crying, or the dog equivalent eek. Well, safe to say I was scared shitless. We lived nowhere near any wildlife or anything with the potential to scare a dog like ours, so that's out of the equation. I only heard it that one night tough, and I rarely slept in our living room or next to my bedroom window for as long as we lived there.
SofaCouch_ says. When I was around 12 to 13, I decided to be dumb and try to pull an all-nighter. Somewhere around the 2 a.m. mark, I started to hear this strange sort of low-pitched vibration sound that would get super loud and then quiet, and then loud again. It switched between those volumes, and then after a few minutes it just stopped. I still have no idea what that was, but I'm more curious to know why that noise was so painfully close to my house. It felt like the noise was coming from my window. It might be something that makes me look stupid, but honestly I have no idea. That noise/vibration scared the shit out of me though.
ArminTanz says. I work nights and came home to an apt complex. There was a guy on the stoop looking frazzled in his bathrobe smoking a cig. I took note of it for some reason cause he seemed off. Turns out he had just committed a double murder and was caught a week later.
Observing_fish says. I remember back then when I was watching top 10 creepy videos with my cousin in his phone late at night since we couldn't sleep, then suddenly we heard a loud screaming, then followed by loud mumbling noise. Then when we checked it where it was coming from, it turns out it was my sister sleeping across the room. She has a habit of talking in her sleep, but it was the first time she done it and we pretty got scared that night.
Alfiejcarey says. When I was 14 I went to my dad for a couple months as things at home were a bit off the rails. We had my baby sister in my dad and stepmom's room. It must have been about 4 in the morning when it happened, and it happened multiple times, but my sister would let out the most deafening screams for like 2 or 3 seconds and then would go absolutely mute. It might have been like a bird or something, but one of the times she did this and after it sounded like something walked across the roof. Weirdest thing, but it scared the shit out of me.
Juggernaut FA81 says. Years ago I was sitting in a park directly across from my apartment complex around 3 a.m. talking to my best friend, and then we hear the sounds of a leaf blower, then children laughing. The sounds came from the trees behind us and there wasn't any houses or anything in those trees. Not sure what those sounds were or why they were coming from that direction, but we quickly made haste and left.
Jack01 says, I was going to beat it around 2 o'clock to 3 a.m. at my nan's, grandma's, house in Spain, and as I was about to go to bed, I heard someone walking up the stairs. I figured it was my nan grandma. I got in bed and began to watch YouTube. My bedroom door creaked open. I could see a silhouette of a person in the darkness. I just decided to shut my door and go to sleep, thinking it was the dark getting to me. I woke up a few hours later to a young boy at the end of my bed. He ran off as I screamed my head off. I never found out who or what it was, but my nan, grandma, is a very spiritual person and talks to dead people. She told me it was a good spirit and not to worry. I struggled to sleep for the rest of the visit. DLDR, saw a ghost when I was visiting my grandparents.
ZZ870 says, was watching television really late one night, around 2 a.m. or so. My roommate worked an early morning job and had to be at work at 6 a.m. so he usually went to bed at 10 p.m. Now the TV is up against a wall that has an archway into our kitchen on the right of the TV. My roommate's room is directly behind me, behind the couch. It's in the middle of the living room. The other door in the kitchen connects to our garage, so you can imagine my surprise when I see my roommate walk out of the kitchen and right past me. I say, "Why are you awake?" as I turn my head and realize I'm completely alone in the living room, with all the lights on. No clue what that was, but I didn't sleep that night.
Prisongirls says, going to bed late one night around 3 a.m., and I go to shut off the light over the sink in the kitchen. The sink sits under a window that looks out into my backyard, and into a wooded area beyond the fence. I see two small red lights hovering just beyond the fence, directly in my line of sight. I'm instantly creeped the hell out. Our kitchen has been remodeled recently, and the new way the electronics are positioned in the kitchen/dining room area, the lights on them will oftentimes reflect on the glass of the kitchen window when I go to turn off that light. But the lights on the TV and router and other miscellaneous lights are green or white, not red. I consciously knew that, but I still tried to explain it away. Then they proceeded to disappear after a couple of minutes of trying to figure out what they were. Fast forward about 5 weeks deep in the throes of quarantine, and my husband points out a drone in our backyard, just beyond the fence in the woods, and it has two red lights on it. Motherfucker. And it turns out he saw the lights months before I did, around 5 a.m. one morning on his way to work. He also thought it was a reflection of the TV. I didn't confront the person controlling the drone because I didn't make the connection until after they were gone. I was thinking about how uncomfortable it made me feel. How watched I felt. There's a hike and bike trail directly behind the fence that is very popular, so I figured it was kids messing around, but at 3 a.m. and 5 a.m.? No thanks. And if I see that damn drone again, I'm coming after it with a bat.
Need_weed says, not that creepy, but it was weird. On night between 1 to 2 a.m. a sanitation truck drove back and forth on my block 8 times. There is a divider in the middle of the street, and I noticed that each time they passed they were driving down the wrong side of the road. This was very odd because my street is busy and there are always a few cars and trucks driving on my street at night. After the third time I tried to see who was driving, but I couldn't see them.
Garrys-Blue-Rose says, I was using my phone, and got up to stretch. My bed is right beside my window, so, as I stretched, I was looking out. I saw this black mass climbs the fence blocking the car wash from my backyard, and it crawled towards my house. No one believed me when I told them.
Briggsnotmyers says, one night alone in my dorm 100 miles from my house I swore I heard my brother screaming for me to help him, using a childhood nickname he hasn't said in over a decade. I was this close to calling home at 1 a.m. just to check, but I didn't because I didn't want to scare anyone else. As far as I know he's fine. Auditory hallucinations near sleep are well established and I get them, but never screaming like that. My best friend grew up in a new old house, colonial era old. I go to use the bathroom in the middle of the night and this guy felt two things watching me pee. The bathtub is giving me raised hackles even though I can clearly see there is nothing in it, not a cat or even a bug. I tell my friend in the morning and she's just like, oh yeah, that used to be a bedroom, 2 kids died of yellow fever in there. I think they're just confused about the running water.
Heckin_cool says. So this happened when I was around 16 and on vacation with my family in New Orleans. I've always been morbidly curious about occult stuff, so while we were there my younger sister and I went to this famous voodoo shop and got our fortunes read. I had a tarot reading that was really accurate but nothing weird. My sister, though, got a palm reading that got a bit spooky when the fortune teller asked if she was prone to talking in her sleep. I said hell yeah, she does it all the time. Really loud too. And they just simply said sleep talkers have a connection to the dead. Sometimes the dead will try to send messages to the living by speaking through them. Okay, sure, that sounds cool. Later that night my sister and I are sharing a double bed in our hotel room with our parents in an adjacent room. It's like 1 a.m. and she's knocked, but like usual I was wide awake messing around on my phone. Out of nowhere the kid sits bolt upright with her eyes open looking straight ahead and says _it's not our fault _ in a kind of gravelly voice. I was frozen for a second before I finally choked out what isn't? She just repeated the same thing, it's not our fault. And then laid back down. What the fuck? As soon as she hits the pillow she's out again, nothing out of place. I woke her up straight away and asked what she meant, but she had zero recollection of anything. She had really been asleep. Honestly, I still don't know what's supposedly not our fault. The only thing I could think of was that our parents had recently divorced. We were traveling with mom and stepdad, but I don't know if that warrants a sinister message from the afterlife.
Pulse says. Heard a knock on the door, went to see who it was. Nothing there. Next morning we had our TV stolen.
Rowdy Raccoon 20 says. It was about 1 to 2 in the morning, I was chilling playing video games. My bedroom is at the back end of my house and gets most of the wind and is the coldest place in the house during winter, plus I have a big ass window that takes half my wall up. Pretty much it was cold as f. I had a blanket on with the heater on sitting right next to me that was loud as f too. I also had a pair of headsets on so I couldn't really hear anything besides my game and the heater going. Then I hear a sound coming from outside my window. It was echoing and it sounded like an air horn / siren sound. I took my headset off and it was even louder. I don't live near any mountains or hills or anything like that, so I don't know how it was echoing or anything. It went on for about 20 minutes then just stopped. Till this day I don't know what it was.
Abject Pandora says. I've got a huge bed all to myself and many times I'll be laying in and reading, watching a movie / YouTube, or playing games and the bed will suddenly jolt like someone had kicked the end of it. I don't use a frame so it's just my mattresses on the box springs on the floor. My current dog never reacted so I just shrugged it off and it's so common now that it doesn't really bother me anymore. My last dog passed away almost 2 years ago and my family had her cremated. I currently have her ashes nestled on my bookshelf so maybe it's her little doggy spirit coming to bed at night. Other times my quilt will feel like it's being pulled really gently or someone sits next to me. I usually brush those off until I had my first experience with sleep paralysis and now I'd quit to think / believe. Edit. I've also heard voices, laughter, a child's, or some other sound I couldn't really make out. A few times I've heard what I thought were planes but they sound nothing like the big passenger planes, the smaller jets, or the little personal planes that fly by on occasion. I don't want to jump the gun and say there were UFOs but I'm at a loss for what I could be hearing.
IslandAirFan17 says. A van pulled up in the street out front of my across the street neighbor's house. It sat there for what felt like 10 minutes, the inside lights were on but I couldn't see anything. Suddenly 2 dudes get out of the van, one of them carrying a garbage bag. and walked down the block and disappeared out of my sight. Nothing came of it, but I was pretty scared a home invasion was about to happen or something. It's one of my biggest fears to begin with, but that was actually legit sketchy AF.